the MicroBrewr podcast. Here's your host, Joe Shellaroo.
Hello and welcome to MicroBrewr podcast number 7. So I always start this off and say that if you're thinking of starting a brewery or if you currently own one, this is the podcast for you. But I've also been getting a lot of feedback where there's other people who aren't necessarily looking to start a brewery but are listening to the podcast, because there's really a lot of stuff that can apply to different types of businesses that you're getting ready to go. So again, we're going to be focusing on craft beer, but if you're thinking of starting up something else and can get some pointers from this, thanks for listening. All right, and for the podcast, I started drinking some beer when I'd be recording the podcast because I thought they went well together. And today, having one from Samuel Smith, the Tatty Porter. It's good stuff. I think the oatmeal stout is still my, it's a really solid beer, but this one's pretty good too. I like it a lot. So right now we're recording the podcast. It's a week after the Craft Brewers Conference just got done, and sadly I wasn't able to make it. Right now my wife is 7 months pregnant with our first. We're having a boy, so that's exciting. But I don't think she would have been too happy with me if I would have left for 4 days. So wasn't able to make it, but I definitely followed along online and looked like it was a blast. So overall for the podcast, just got to say that this thing has just taken off beyond what I could have expected. This has just been so awesome. I mean, just in April, in the first 4 days of the month, we already had more downloads than we had in all of February, and that's when we launched the actual site. So I really appreciate all the support. It's just been awesome. And the people who've gotten in contact with me, it's just been great. If you're listening to the podcast and you like it, send me an email and let me know. It just keeps motivating me to keep going on, And then if you're liking the podcast, one other thing you could do is if you can go into iTunes and just leave a quick review. Honestly, it takes like 2 minutes. All you have to do is go into iTunes, search for MicroBrewr, and then you can pull it up. All you have to do is click the stars. Really appreciate the feedback as you're going through. And what this does is it really helps to get the word out. The more reviews we have, the more it pops up in the search results and just helps spread the word on everything that we got going on here. So if you do that, I'm really grateful. So thank you. So in this podcast, we've got Colin McDonald from HenHouse Brewing Company in Petaluma, California. I was really excited to get him on. And so Andrew Steinbeck, actually, he sent me this article on Facebook. So thanks, Andrew, for sending this over. And Colin provided this great article on really the unsexy parts of what it was like to become a brewer. But I think that he gave such great transparency on what it is that, some people will just look at brewing and say, oh, you just get to brew beer and drink beer all day. Well, it's really not all that. And so Colin really digs into that, and I thought it was a great interview. So we'll just jump into it and enjoy. All right, and today on the podcast, I'm really happy to bring Colin McDonald onto the podcast. He's starting up HenHouse Brewing Company in Petaluma, California. And Colin, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Hey, man. So I got sent your article that you just wrote, and you had a ton of great stuff to share. So I was hoping we could touch on that. But first off, I was wondering if you could just kind of introduce yourself to the audience.
Absolutely. So I'm one of the 3 founders with my partners, Shane Gopal and Scott Goyne of HenHouse Brewing Company. We got started started selling beer almost 2.5 years ago. We did the nano brewery thing. We were on a 2-barrel brew house. We were turning out 2 barrels a week, and it's taken us about 2 years to raise enough money for us to slowly start quitting our jobs and sell a little bit more beer. And right now we're still Petaluma only, but hopefully at the end of this month we'll be rolling out into other parts of the Bay Area, and then we'll see where it takes us from there.
All right. So before you got into brewing, what's your background?
Oh, so I was working right when I got out of college as a communications consultant, which the first question everybody asks is, what does a communications consultant do? And I don't have a good answer to that question, which made me deeply unhappy. I had no idea why I was going to work every day. And so I quit that job with no backup plan. At the time, it was a very bad decision. In the long term, it's worked out well for me. And wasn't doing anything but homebrewing for about 6 months. And after about 6 months of looking for a different consulting job and brewing 4 or 5 batches of beer a week, I was like, well, I guess it's time to pursue this professionally. So I just bummed around all the brew pubs in Oakland and San Francisco, where I was living at the time, and got an apprenticeship at Thirsty Bear, which turned into an assistant brewer position at the 21st Amendment in San Francisco, and then a job at Beach Chalet, and then ended up working at Drake's Brewing Company as a production brewer for about 2 years. And kind of that whole time there was the background idea of starting my own brewery, which when I started brewing with Shane and Scott got a lot more serious, and we started HenHouse.
All right. So when you were going through, you were working at all these different breweries and thinking about starting your own brewery. What was the key steps that you needed to do to say, all right, I'm ready to go. I'm starting my own brewery right now?
I don't know that there is a key step. I think first and foremost, working in a brewery before starting a brewery is absolutely the smartest thing that I've done as far as starting this company goes. And that's not half the skills that are required to start a brewery. So having the experience of working in someone else's brewery, seeing how they do things, and not only one person's brewery, but multiple breweries, and kind of getting the sense of like, all right, here's how things work on this scale. Here's how they work on a bigger scale. Here's how they work on a 4-day-a-week schedule. Here's how they work on a 24-hour schedule. Kind of getting that sense really allows you to, when you go into business plan land, kind of navigate more effectively and know what you want to do with your own brewery. And then, I partnered up with two guys, not for no reason. Scott is he's an electrician by trade and a human Swiss Army knife, just incredibly good at all of the trades, and has been running his own contractor's business for about 10 years. So he really brought in not only, those technical skills and the business acumen, but also he's a certified herbalist. So he really kind of brought in this creative aspect to the company that's really been helpful in what we're trying to do, And then my other partner, Shane, has been homebrewing since I met him, and has been working as a production manager of a co-manufacturing facility that makes soap. And so, in addition to bringing kind of a deep understanding of brewing process with him, he brings this knowledge of how to operate a factory, which is kind of the non-sexy way of describing a brewery. A lot of the time it gets kind of thrown around as this like fun, drink beer and make it kind of place. But at the end of the day, it's a factory where you turn, barley, yeast, hops, and water into beer. And not only beer, but packaged beer. So kind of having that production management experience on the team was really, really important. And I think it's made a difference as far as the kind of quality of process that we're striving for.
Yeah, so tell me about HenHouse. What makes you guys different? What types of beer are you offering? Is it distribution or is it brew pub? Can you just kind of give us a background on that?
Well, so we're focused on distribution right now. We're doing what's called alternating proprietorship, which is we're leasing space from another brewing company, Petaluma Hills Brewing Company. We're leasing space on their brew house, and then we've got our own fermentation and packaging vessels, and our own kegs, our own cold warehouse. And that's kind of the setup. So we're really focused on distribution, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that we like bringing beer to people. I like going out and meeting people where they are, and so getting out and about seemed important to that. The other kind of half of the alternating proprietorship is that it's a much cheaper way to start up. There are a lot of pitfalls in that not having your own facility means that you have to kind of work around someone else's schedule. And we were lucky enough to partner with someone who, JJ at Petaluma Hills, who kind of saw the vision and was on board. And we're really, striving to help him out in every way that we can. And he's, very graciously allowing us to rent space from him. So it's been a real win-win scenario. Mostly on the financial level, and that we've invested a lot less than we would have had to have built our own facility. So that's kind of what we're doing there. What makes us different is a lot of things. First and foremost, we're a Petaluma company. We really, really want to be. We want to support the town we're from. All three of us grew up around here. Me and Scott in town. Shane grew up in Santa Rosa and has been living in Petaluma for about 15 years now. And we really wanted to do something that was Petaluma oriented. So that's where the name of the company comes from. Petaluma used to be the poultry capital of the world. So we wanted a name that, for the company that really, Petalumans knew where we're from. And at the same time is not like, people from San Francisco are like, oh, Petaluma, I'd never go there. So we wanted something that was a little subtler, and didn't alienate people who weren't from Petaluma. So that's HenHouse. Actually, the building that we got started in when we were doing the nano brewing thing used to be an egg incubator facility. So it was kind of a cool story to have. And then on the beer front, we're really focusing on yeast-centric beers. The beer that we're doing all the time is our Saison. It's a nice light 5.5 beer. Made with black pepper and coriander, and a real aggressive yeast character from the ferment. And the reason we wanted to focus on yeast-driven beers is we're in Petaluma. Lagunitas is in Petaluma. They've got the hoppy thing under control. I don't think that we really need to add to that. So, obviously we love hoppy beers, and we're going to do IPAs down the road. But one of the things for us was, we didn't want to be the second fiddle. And so we're really trying to be the yeast-driven beers coming out of around here. And people responded really well to that. When we started making Saison 3.5 years ago, before we were selling, and we were just showing it to people, every single person you offered a beer to asked you what a Saison was. And lately at beer fests and at events and at bars, no one asks. Everybody knows now. And so I think we were kind of right on the money as far as where people's preferences were going, which is that people were really kind of discovering this world of yeasty beers, and we want to be a big part of that.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, going back to the alternating proprietorship, like you were saying, that's a great way to get into the brewing industry without having to put up the capital to buy all of your own stuff to build your own brewery.
Yeah,
exactly. And on the financial side, that really helps you out. And then going for the yeast-centric route, then just being the same as everybody else and realizing with that little niche that you can fit in the market, it really shows that you've already thought about that, which is great and very important with the huge number of craft breweries that are out there right now.
Yeah, I mean, I say this all the time to people, is that selling beer is not hard. You get in and people want to drink beer. People love beer. There's, a 10,000 year history of people drinking beer, so people are going to do it, What's hard is getting noticed. Not only are there, these mega brewers which so dominate the American mind, and, I know we all think that craft beer is ascendant right now, but it's still only 7% of the national market. So really, we're still the little kids in a lot of way. But then even among the little kids, there's 2,700 of us. That's a lot of people to compete with for attention and for tap handle space and for shelf space. So, kind of to us, it was really important to do something that stands out, both on a quality level. We're really, really, really focusing hard on quality, and also just on a kind of visual, perceptual level. We wanted to be a beer that jumps out, and we really tried to focus ourselves that way.
So, Colin, you talked about quality, and I know in your article you covered some of the stuff that you've got to do to maintain that quality. I was wondering if you could walk through the actual real-life daily process of a brewer.
I mean, I don't know that there's at our level, there's no daily. Everything is so wildly different from day to day. But on the quality level, there's a couple of things that we're really focusing on from the beginning, which are monitoring and data collection. There's a ton of monitoring that needs to be done on all parts of the process. So kind of one of the things that we focused on was we looked at all the data collection kind of stuff that I had done at different breweries, and figured out which parameters, mash temperatures, boil lengths, weights, pHs, gravities, all that stuff, which kind of data points that we would be able to collect on this particular setup, because, different breweries are set up in different ways that allow you to collect different data. So we kind of looked at all those, and then we looked at good manufacturing practices that Scott and Shane had a lot of experience with in the co-manufacturing industry, and we kind of came up with, all right, what's the data that's relevant to how we make beer, and how do we collect it, and how do we collect it in a meaningful way? So we really focused on mentally ergonomic brew sheets, mentally ergonomic fermentation sheets, packaging sheets. So like, that Serious Eats article was not particularly sexy, and neither is writing a bunch of spreadsheets to compile data information, but it's been really gratifying to kind of create those data collection parameters and then watch our fermentations match up with our data points almost spot on every single time. To be able to be in control of the production process like that and know that you're in control of it is really, really gratifying. So that's kind of one half of it, is setting up a system that allows you to monitor and measure and know what you're trying to control. And then a lot of it is just equipment and time. Taking daily cell counts is a labor-intensive process that requires a microscope, which isn't free. But once you get into the habit of doing it, you can see, all right, these fermentations, the cell count all kind of operates the same way, and you can learn to predict those things, and it allows you to effectively run a brewery. And then at a certain point, once you have enough data, you can kind of, all right, we don't do cell counts on every single batch. We do cell counts on every other batch or every third batch, depending on how well in control you are. And the same thing with pH monitoring, gravity monitoring. You can learn the patterns in those things, which allows you to create effective production schedules. So to do that, you need to have the tools. You need the pH meter. You need we use hydrometers and a digital refractometer to measure gravity. You need to have a microscope and plates to do cell count work. One of the things we're working towards now is getting an autoclave so that we can be doing contamination tests on our own beer. Those kinds of things just allow us to know that when we get beer to people, it's the best it could possibly be.
Yeah, and so my background's engineering. I came from a couple different manufacturing plants. Mm-hmm. We would set up procedures and different things like that to specify, all right, here's the key parameters you need to be within to make sure that quality coming out is the same. So when you're going through this and you're trying to figure out what you really need to watch, is it just through experimentation? It's through your previous experiences, and you say that these are the 10 key parameters, or do you set up a procedure on how to make sure your quality is the same? How do you go through specifying exactly what you need to know?
Well, I mean, it varies beer to beer. Certain beers have certain key parameters. With yeast-driven beers, a lot of it is about how you take care of the yeast. So, we do, there's kind of a lot of minutia of it. Shane said this really brilliant thing, which I love, which is for him, the beautiful part of brewing is that it's a very simple process. You're just converting starches into sugar and fermenting them. It's not crazy, but the permutations of that are infinitely complex. So, when you talk about what's the important parameter to hit, it varies a lot beer to beer, and there's not one way to skin a cat. So even, to achieve a flavor profile, there's probably multiple ways to get to it. So at the end of the day, the most important thing is making sure that the beer tastes good. We don't package anything without at least two of the partners signing off that the beer tastes good. That's what's kind of most important. And then you kind of work backwards from there. It's with the Saison, we're really looking for a strong ester profile out of the yeast, so we oxygenated a little bit less than we otherwise would have, which kind of stresses the yeast to create a little bit stronger of an ester profile. with things that we're looking for, more neutral yeast character out of, we oxygenate more heavily. So, like you can kind of work backwards from what is the flavor you want to achieve to what are the specific parameters to measure. There's some basic things like, daily gravity readings and daily pH readings on, or pH readings in your mash, pH readings in your boil. Like, there are basic things like that you can kind of apply to all beers. But the kind of key parameters have to be defined by the flavor profile that you're going for.
Yeah, so you're obviously doing a lot of data collection. I know the other thing that you talked about in the article was the amount of cleaning that's required when you're a brewer. Yeah, could you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, brewing is creating an environment for yeast. That's really what it is. You're trying to excuse me. You're trying to create sugar water so that yeast creates beer, and in that sense, you want to create the most hospitable home for yeast possible, which means constant cleaning. So we're certainly on the paranoid end of cleaning, but I'd rather be safer than, like no one ever comes to the end of a brewing career and goes, man, I wish I had cleaned less things, Generally, the only people who think about how much time they spend cleaning are people who have contamination problems, and then you're like, fuck, we really should have cleaned more. So we really like strive to maintain a clean process, and I'm a big believer in you look professional, you act professional, which means things not only need to be sanitary, but they also just need to be clean and tidy. Sorry to jump up in the middle of this. I'm like dying. I'm going to grab a glass of water really quickly.
Oh no, it's fine.
Yeah, have some.
No problem. Yeah, and while you're getting some water, kind of go into the next question. So there's a ton of cleaning that's also required. So you got the data collection. Another thing that I know you were talking a lot about, which ties to the data collection, is just the amount of regulatory compliance that you've got to deal with as a small brewery. So I was wondering if you could kind of go through that and the different things that you've learned through that along the way.
Yeah, I mean, regulatory compliance is huge. Brewing is such a heavily regulated industry. In California, the ABC is fairly modern compared to a lot of other states, but there's just a mess of regulations that you need to answer to, and there, we're what is it now? Almost 40 years after Reagan became president, we're still dealing with the kind of starve the beast governmental mentality. That means that a lot of these regulatory agencies that you have to answer to don't actually have the resources or personnel necessary to enforce their own regulations, which kind of leads to this situation where you have to do these things, and you have to have them reviewed, but there's nobody to review them, which means you just end up in this purgatory forever. So, if you come into that environment with a bad attitude, the regulators who are already totally stressed out and totally underfunded, just, they don't want to work with you, and they don't have to because there's a huge line of people waiting to work with them. So being nice to regulators is so incredibly important. It's like, there's a whole lot of make sure you know what the regulations are, make sure you're compliant, make sure you document that and can prove it when you need to. But just as far as like moving things along in a timely fashion and even getting someone to explain to you what it is that you're supposed to be doing, kindness goes an unbelievably far way. You really, really got to be just nice to all the people you work with, because they will help you out.
How have your experiences been contacting these different regulators and asking them what you need to be doing? Is there an easy list that people are able to give you, or do they know? Are they able to spell it out simply for the person entering the industry?
The TTB, the federal agency, that's the good news. The agency that everybody in the nation has to answer to in the brewery world, they're really good. They know what they're looking for. They have a fairly good understanding of kind of what the differences are between small breweries and big breweries, and they have a pretty clear setup of kind of the reporting that they'd like to see from you. And it gets tougher the smaller the agency gets. So, the California ABC, they're pretty good about like explaining to you what it is that you need to do, but they're woefully understaffed, and so sometimes it just takes them forever to get back to you. With really simple things like we received your document, but that's just like a function of them being an underfunded agency. And then, further down, like, the city and county level, you get into kind of, most regulators have never had to deal with a brewery. And if they have, it's probably not, a brewery like ours that has a capacity of 2,000 barrels a year. We're not even doing that for production. So it's really hard to kind of get people to understand what your brewery is doing. So, I mean, as far as starting a brewery goes, I think that, one of the smartest things you could do on a regulatory level is, get regulators out to your business as fast as possible and kind of show them a great deal of transparency as far as what's going on, because they probably don't know what brewery operations look like, or, what impact they would have on, cities' utilities, on the various regulations that cities have on building code, all these kinds of things. So it's real important to kind of, like, again, with a little bit of kindness, bring people in, explain to them what you're doing, and, help them understand your process so that they can understand how it is that their regulations apply to that.
Yeah, and we had a roundup post a little while ago when we talked to a bunch of different breweries about what some of the key learnings that they had from starting up their brewery. And I had a couple people respond back and essentially explain that they had to learn all the codes and then explain them to the regulators, since in a lot of these smaller towns, the regulators haven't necessarily seen a new brewery coming in before, and they're just not that familiar with it. Just like city inspectors and different things like that. So I think that what you're saying, building the key relationships, making sure they're on your side is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing about it is, like, there's a lot of really outdated regulation dealing with all alcohol manufacturers, and there's also just not been that many alcohol manufacturers compared to how many there are right now. So for a lot of regulators, this is all very new ground, and kind of being able to explain to them what you're doing in terms beyond, like, I'm making beer, is really, really helpful.
Yeah. So through this podcast, we've talked about the amount of documentation, we've talked about cleaning, we've talked about regulations and getting on the side with regulators. What type of person do you think really thrives in starting up a brewery? I know you talked about where if you're just introverted and want to brew beer all day, you're going to have a tough time starting up a brewery just because there's so many other things that are required.
Yeah, I mean, far be it from me to say who can and cannot start a brewery, but I think, having a great deal of patience is really, really helpful. It's just a long, slow process, and being able to weather it is really incredibly important. I think that being someone who likes learning new skills is really, really important. As we've discussed, there's just dozens and dozens of things that you never thought you would have to deal with that suddenly you need to be fluent in. And being able to pick up those new skills quickly is really, really important. Or, in my case, having partners that already have those skills is really, really important. So, I think that those are the two big ones. You really got to be willing to stick with it, and you really got to be able to pick up new traits quickly.
Yeah. Do you guys have a vision or a theme for your brewery?
I mean, I of course have a vision.
Yeah.
For me, what really excites me about beer is its kind of communal aspect. Beer is not just flavored alcohol water. Like, if it was, we'd all make vodka and it'd be easier, cheaper, and we'd make bigger margins. But it's not. And I think that the reason that people like beer and that people drink beer is because it does bring people together. You go out and you have a beer with somebody. It's very, very much a communal beverage. And so for me, having our brewery focus on how do we, kind of through our craft, create community for other people is the long-term vision. And that means, we want to get to a point where we have kind of a communal meeting space, whether that's like a restaurant or an event center or maybe something different and larger. We want to be out in lots of places, kind of giving people the opportunity to come together over beer with us. We want to, of course, bring people to us, but we also want to just go to the people and help facilitate those things. And, we want to focus on making the best beer that there is. That's all the stress about quality is not just because, I really love our pH meter, which I do. All that stuff is really about, like, how do we create the best beer experience for someone possible? And, like, that'll take you, that question will take you down a dozen different roads. One of them is, like, for me, the best beer experience is hanging out with my friends. It's not getting drunk. So that kind of leads us down the, like, well, we want to focus on lower alcohol beers. Like our Saison is 5.5. We've got a bunch of other beers right in that range, the 4.5 to 5.5 range that we're really proud of. And that's kind of what we want to be known for, so it leads you down that road. The other kind of question is, like, how do you create the best beer experience? We'll keep the beer fresh. So, for us right now, we're self-distributed because that's the best way for us to keep the supply chain short and keep our beer fresh, where people are drinking it. And so when you start kind of asking those questions of, like, how do we create, like, a cool experience for other people, it leads to a lot of decisions.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good aspect that I haven't thought about. Self-distributing your beer is just the time that it takes to get it out there instead of going through the distributor, maybe ending up in a warehouse for a few weeks before you finally make it out to the liquor store wherever your beer is being sold.
Yeah.
So I never thought about that.
A few weeks is optimistic, I would say. There's the distribution. The distribution network in this country, is not designed to handle 2,700 breweries. The Beer Institute runs a really cool thing called the Brewer's Almanac, which is just historical data about the brewing industry. And it's really, really interesting to kind of look at the trends. And one of them is that, there was a massive consolidation brought on by industrialization, which started before Prohibition and then was really accelerated by Prohibition in the brewery side of things. But whereas that consolidation has kind of turned around and now there are more and more and more breweries, the consolidation of wholesalers has not stopped. There are less wholesalers than there were last year, this year, and fewer even than there were in 2012. So, I think it's strange to me to think that a brewery that's trying to move 2,000 barrels of beer a year would get any kind of attention from a distributor which is carrying, up to maybe 100 different breweries' beer. Which means that, if you're not out there really hustling it yourself, then your beer is just going to sit. And if you're already out there really hustling it yourself, like, why aren't you driving around in a refrigerated van?
So you guys are out there hustling around to sell your beer. What else is working for sales to get the word out about HenHouse?
I mean, we're still very much in startup mode. The getting the word out there is about getting out in front of people, talking to people, and telling people about what we're doing. We don't have the money for ads, not even print ads, let alone radio or television. So it's really about kind of like, how many people can I get in front of and tell our story to? And that, again, it goes back to creating good beer experiences. It's like, we can go to a beer fest. In the small brewery world, you're obliged to go to beer fests to get the word out. But if there's 50 breweries there, like, how are we going to stand out? Well, we want to be the people who create the best experience there. And so, we're looking at, like, how do we get away from having a jockey box on a folding table and a line of people and we're just handing out beers as fast as we can? How do we create, like, a better experience than that? And that's one of the things that we're working on, a lot of it is about, like, what are other cool kind of community things that we could be tied into, that aren't just beer fests, that aren't, like, necessarily the people who are most tuned into the beer world. So it's a lot about putting yourself out there and doing it in ways that make you stand out.
Okay. Hey, Colin, for anybody who's thinking of starting up a brewery, any keywords of advice? I know you were talking about that definitely working at a brewery is key. Is there any other things that you'd say you got to do?
Rich parents is a good idea. That would be really smart. Winning the lottery also helps. I cannot understate how important that experience is, both in brewing and just in large scale manufacturing in general, and how incredibly expensive it is to start a brewery. You really you want to have like a firm grasp on how much everything costs, and then you want to double it. Everybody will say this to you, but it's unbelievably true that everything costs more and takes longer, and it'll do it at the same time. So your rent will be more than you think it will be, and you will pay it for longer.
Yeah, that was. I mean, the talking to a bunch of the different brewers for advice. That was one of the key things is capital. I think it was triple it, and the amount of time that you think it'll take double that. So,
that's about right. That's about right.
All right. Hey, for anybody who wants to find out more about your brewery, about HenHouse, where should they go to?
HenHouseBrewing.com is currently redirect to our Facebook page, but our website will be going live shortly here.
Okay.
The Facebook page is lively. Keep it updated. The Twitter at HenHouse Brewing is also a great place to get a hold of us. And other than that, hopefully bars and restaurants around the Bay Area.
And I'll also put a link out to that great article that you did. So Colin really outlined what it was like to be in the brewing industry. So I'll put that out because I thought that was awesome. And all the links that we're talking about we'll have on the show notes page. So that's going to be microbrewer.com/session7. Again, microbrewer.com/session7. You can spell it out or put the number. So Colin, I just want to say thanks so much for joining the podcast. You have a wealth of information. It's been great talking to you.
Absolutely, Joe. Thanks for having me on. Hope that's helpful for your listeners.
Oh, it was very helpful for me. So I'm sure it'll be helpful for them too. All right. Thanks.
Take care.
All right, and I hope you enjoyed that interview with Colin. I just had a blast talking to him, and he had a ton of great information. You can tell that they're just putting a ton of passion into putting out quality beer. So if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, make sure to go check out HenHouse Brewing. I know just by talking to them that you're going to get some great stuff if you go check them out. And any of the links that we talked about, again, you can go to microbrewer.com. That's microbrewer.com. You can go to microbrewer.com/session7, or else you can just click on podcasts and get there. So again, if you get a chance, I would just love a review in iTunes, or if you get a chance, reach out to me and just let me know what you think of the podcast. if there's any topics that you want to hear coming up, or if there's any other things that I can do for you, I'm definitely all ears. So I just really appreciate you listening and want to give back. So make sure to support your local breweries, and we will see you next time on the MicroBrewr podcast.
Thanks for listening to the MicroBrewr Podcast with Joe Shelleroo. We'll see you right here next time at microbrewer.com.